Our next candidate is Senator Aimee Klobuchar.
Hey there. Thank you for joining us to see the people.
Hello. Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow, what a crowd.
Oh yeah, we've never seen a crowd like this.
I was thinking, though, that there is only one Aimee in Congress, and we need a second one.
Oh.
Ooh.
Okay.
I like you already. Let's begin with our first, a very serious topic. Philando Castile was killed in your home state by a policeman, and there's ample and very painful evidence of relentless violence against Black and brown people nationwide. What is your commitment, and what will be your commitment as president, to lead a national effort to implement anti-racism statutes and policies, particularly when it comes to policing, and how can the federal government protect citizens from harm and criminalization at the hands of police?
Thank you for that question. And I'm sure many of you know that sad and horrific tale of Philando Castile, who was literally shot just driving and stopped for really not a good reason and was killed by a police officer. I supported the prosecution of that police officer, and he was prosecuted. Unfortunately, the jury did not come back with a guilty verdict. But what we learned as a community in that case was you had this young man who worked in a cafeteria at his school, and he was loved by the students. They all adored him, and we lost him. I have met with his family, and it just reminds you of what we are dealing with right now in the criminal justice system. I have a law enforcement background, so I'm able to see it, and I've seen the racism that's in our system, and I've also seen the good work that we can do together. So I would say, first of all, our police departments and our prosecutors' offices have to reflect the community that we serve, and so do our grand juries. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to train and put the money into training our officers. We have to pursue those cases when they violate the law. We have to take responsibility for those cases when they happen. And we also have to have a system that works. One of the things that I've been focused on since getting to the United States Senate is on our nonviolent drug offenses that have gotten ridiculously long on the federal level. I wrote a piece recently about a woman named Josephine that served 24 years for a nonviolent drug offense. She wasn't even doing drugs. She wasn't even selling drugs. And President Obama finally pardoned her. And in her words, she can now go back to being a grandma. True story. What do we need to do? We did one thing, the First Step Act that Corey and Kamala and I all co-sponsored, and that allows finally a reduction in those federal drug sentences. The second thing that we need to do is the Second Step Act, because 90% of people incarcerated in this country are not in federal prisons. They are in state and local jails. And so that step will mean putting out the incentives so the states do the right thing. And the last thing I would say is reentry. With the exception of violent offenders, murderers, heinous murderers, most people are going to be getting out of prison. And I was long involved in a program where you visited someone in prison. I visited her for years in prison, and she is now out. And that's what's going to happen to a lot of people. And we got to make sure that they're able to get jobs. The administration just did a really bad thing in that regard when it comes to diversion programs. Today that I oppose, we've got to make sure that people are able to vote when they get out of prison. We have to make sure that they're able to participate in our community. And those are all things in addition to how our criminal justice system acts. Equally importantly is how we allow people, when they get back into our society, to contribute.
And you talked about, as a quick follow-up, having a law enforcement background and a background as a prosecutor. One of the reasons it's so rare for police officers to be convicted in cases like Philando Castile's and others, no matter what the circumstances, police officers get the automatic presumption, essentially a presumption that they are in the right so long as they can assert that they feared for their life. And it's really on the officer's word most of the time. At least that's the perception of most of the public. Do you support laws that give officers so much of a presumption of being in the right in shootings of unarmed civilians? Or should the laws be changed either to change that presumption to make there be more investigation, or to take the decision on prosecution out of the hands of prosecutors who are often working hand in hand with the police?
Okay, so a few things on that. Obviously, we should look at those laws, they're state by state, and I think they vary, but the things that I think are a problem, when I was a prosecutor, everything went to the grand jury. That's how we did it back then, when there was a shooting. And I think there needs some more accountability with the individual county attorney, in my case, prosecutor, looking at those cases themselves and owning what happens. I think the investigation should not be done by the police department where the officer worked. I feel very strongly, and I actually took a stand on this way back when I had that job before, that shouldn't happen. So I think you have to have a fair process when you investigate these cases.
We have a couple questions from our audience members. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. That is very cool. Thank you. You guys you can't see the orange hair on your side, but it's very, very cool. There we go.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar.
Hello.
My name is June Barrett. I am a elder caregiver from Miami, and I'm here with Care in Action. I'm one of the millions of domestic workers, mostly women and women of color, who care for children, the elderly, people with disability, and keep homes clean and safe. But too often, it is poverty wage work. Our work is essential, and it makes everything in the economy possible. But too often, it is poverty work without benefit. I myself struggle to afford health care and cannot afford the high copay and deductibles charged by private health insurance companies. The need for care is on the rise. And care workers.
You're okay. You're doing great. You're doing great. You're great. Okay.
And care workers who do this essential work cannot care for their own families. How will you lead the creation of an inclusive care system that ensures that everyone can have access to quality care and caregivers who do this work can live with dignity?
Thank you. That's a great question.
Wait for your answer.
Come on.
Wait for your answer.
Okay. Thank you. Because I want to look at you when I answer this. So thank you for your work. And thank you for doing. My dad is in assisted living, so I see firsthand how hard caregivers work every single day. So let me start with this. First of all, you should have good pay, and that means a $15 minimum wage at a minimum. All right? Secondly, we should make sure that unions are able to organize and not cut down on those rights. And we have an administration in place right now that seems to try to talk the talk of standing up for workers, but then every time there's a choice for a judge, they pick one that's anti-union, right? Anytime there's a choice for legislation or someone they put in the National Labor Relations Board, they go with someone that's anti-union. That's wrong. The third thing is your health care. Everyone in this country should have a right to affordable health care. And right now we have something that we worked on very hard to get in place, and that is the Affordable Care Act. That was President Obama's signature work. But that was a beginning and not an end. And I believe we have to do more. The first thing I would do is immediately put in place and put forward legislation for a public option so we have an option that's either Medicare or Medicaid based. The second thing I would do is take on the pharmaceutical companies. They think that they own Washington. They don't own me. They don't own me. And that means negotiation for Medicare prices. It brings bringing in less expensive drugs. It means stopping this practice where they keep their competitors off the market. So you do incredibly difficult work, and your work should be treated with respect and dignity, and that means getting paid and having health care.
There were a couple questioners, Medicare-for-All. Where are you on Medicare-for-All?
Right. I have open to looking at Medicare-for-All, but I honestly want to get there sooner. And I think the first thing we need to do is to build on President Obama's work and put in place a public option.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar.
Hello.
My name is Isha Pandit. I work at the
I wish
Center for
everyone could come up here,
Advancing
'cause
Innovative
it's cool.
Policy, and I live
Yes.
here in Houston,
Yes,
Texas.
very good.
Welcome.
It's great to be here.
I'm also the daughter of immigrants who taught me that education is power, that education is everything. And so my question is, what will you do to address the student loan crisis, especially its disproportionate impact on women of color who are more likely to take on debt?
Yes, and when you look at the numbers, it's women of color that gets hurt more than anyone from what's been going on with our college system. So just so you know about me, I wouldn't be here without education. My grandpa was an underground miner, and he had to quit high school so he could work to raise his 9 brothers and sisters. He saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college. My dad went to a 2-year college and then to a 4-year college he finished up. My mom actually grew up poor in Milwaukee, and she ended up going to Minnesota because they had a strong teachers union. And she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. So I am before you today as the first woman elected to the state of Minnesota and a candidate for President of the United States because of education. So what I would do is this. First of all, I think everyone should be able to get college and should be able to get a degree. How do you do that? First of all, you make sure that it is affordable for people, and I would do it based on need. I would expand the Pell Grants that we have in place. Those are better than loans, right? And they right now have a $6,000 limit and a $50,000 limit on income. I would greatly expand that. How would I pay for it? By getting rid of the situation where Warren Buffett actually pays less in taxes than his own secretary. Like, that's wrong. That brings in $125 billion right there. All right. The other thing that I would do is that I would make it easier to get these tax credits for families so that that's easier for them to afford college. I would make 2-year community college free, right? Because right now, there are many people that are just going off the grid and they're not even graduating from high school. And the way you get them in jobs is by exposing them to apprenticeships and making it easy to get those community college degrees, both while they're in high school and where they're out of high school. And the final thing I would do, as we're here in Texas, is comprehensive immigration reform. Because if we don't have that, if we don't make it easier for all kids to pursue the American dream, and I know there's dreamers out there who, by the way, have every right to be in this country and have every right to participate in the education in this country, that want to serve in the military. And with comprehensive immigration reform, it would make it a lot easier for millions of people to pursue an education and fill the jobs that we have open in America today. So I see it as a moral imperative, but I also see it as an economic imperative. And one time I found a 99-year-old Hispanic veteran. I was trying to make the case at home. And this was a guy that was brought over from Mexico. He lived in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. He didn't know that he had been brought over as a kid. He thought he was born in our country. He signed up to fight in World War II. That's when he found out. And back then he told me, you know how you became an American citizen? He said, they brought me to Canada, the Army did, for one night, and I stayed in a hotel, and I came back and I was a citizen. That's what they used to do. He served under General MacArthur. He came back. He met his wife. They had a child. That kid served in the Vietnam War, and I brought that veteran to stand at the World War II memorial with 2 dreamers from the suburbs who wanted to serve in the Air Force, and they couldn't because of our laws now. That's wrong, and we need to change it. So if you look at education, you look at making it affordable for everyone, but you specifically look at how we're handling the immigrant community. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're asking each of the candidates to make the case of why women of color should choose them. You are a Midwestern candidate. Part of the tug of war in the Democratic Party is whether to try to go for the Midwest and try to convert Trump voters, or try to go for the base and really bring out particularly African American women who are such reliable voters. If your base is really Midwestern voters, if your sort of a great selling point is that you can bring over white working class voters, then why should women of color believe that you are their champion?
Okay, good. Here we go. First of all, we have to do both to win, all right? And we have to do both. You look at what happened in this last election. You think of the anniversary, Shirley Chisholm, the first woman, African-American woman in Congress. Guess what? 50 years later to the day, for the first time, we elected 20 African-American women to Congress. That is the arc of justice, and we need more. Certainly in the last election, when you look at how close we were in states, if Stacey Abrams, the great Stacey Abrams, by the way, if she had had a fair shot with the election, she would have won that governorship of Georgia, and we saw change across the country. So how would I lead this ticket, and why am I the one to do it? First of all, I can't pretend to be in your shoes. I'm in one of your shoes as the first woman in many of the jobs I've had, and I know what it's like to be in that room when people aren't taking you seriously. But I can't imagine what it would be like to be the woman who was in the maternity room in that hospital in New Orleans that's telling her doctor that her fingers are swelling and he's not listening and she loses her baby. Or what it's like to be a vice president as a company, someone I know who goes shopping and then gets followed by store security. That happened. I can't imagine what it is like to make, African-American woman to make 61 cents an hour compared to what a man makes, right? A white man. That's wrong. But what I can tell you is that my entire life I have fought for justice. I fought for justice in the Senate. I've been a lead on many of those bills involving voting. Sherrod Brown and I are leading the bill to stop the voting purges, because if you want a seat at the table, you can't be on the menu, and you've got to be able to vote in this democracy. So that's my first thing. The second thing is looking at our economy, where African-American women have not been treated fairly. And if we want an economy that works for everyone, we have to make these leaders in these companies understand that they've got high-paying job open in the technology field. The answer is in this room, right? Those are the people that should be applying for their jobs. And the first, one of the first bills that this president, who I believe has turned his back on African American women, that this president signed into law was a bill I led that allowed more women and created incentives for women of color to get into the STEM fields. Yeah. Did he invite me to the bill signing? No, he did not. But it was my bill. And so when we look...
And Senator,
and so
we're almost out of time.
And I will end with this. It was Barbara Jordan from this great state who once said that what Americans want is something quite simple. They want a country as good as its promise. Let's make good on this promise.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for joining us to See the People.
Great, Aimee.
Thank you.
I look forward to being on this show.
Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? You good?